All right, so we'll be in the same place we were last week, 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27. 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27. And if when one of you guys has it, you want to read it for us, that'd be great. Yep, 24 through 27, to the end of the chapter.
Do you not know that in a race all run? Do you not know that in a race all run, and only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the game into strict training. They do what you have to promise and run they do what you have to promise the rest of
Yeah, and 26 to 27. Yeah, and if you could just read like yell. Yell when you read.
Okay. Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes in to strict training. They do it to get a crown and will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air. No, I beat my body and make it a slave so that whatever I preach will design himself and last, he is qualified for prize.
Very good. And that was 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27. Yeah. The last part of 1 Corinthians 9. Yeah. I was listening to Paul Washer this week a little bit, and he was saying if you want to ruin a good sermon, ask the preacher what he means. All right? And he's saying, back when he was a new believer, this one guy got up, he was preaching on, I think it was being filled with, or walking in the Spirit. He comes up to him afterwards and asks him, what does it mean to walk in the Spirit? He's like, it's a great sermon and everything, but what does it mean to walk in the Spirit? And somebody else had to explain it to him. So we'll start this morning with looking at what does it mean to run to win. All right, just to make sure we're all make sure we're all on the same page, make sure we know what we're talking about, make sure we know what we mean. We say run to win. So what does it mean to run to win? Somebody wants to give an answer. Several of you give an answer. What does it mean to run to win?
110%, as they say.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, very good.
What are you trying to win?
Well, I was just going to say, are we talking on the secular way of thinking or the spiritual side of thinking?
Spiritual side.
Spiritual side. Obviously, it speaks about winning a crown.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, is to run in such a way that we bring other people into the kingdom of God, and that we're where God wants us to be.
Okay, that's definitely part of it. Yeah. Anything else? There's plenty that can go into it. There's plenty of different ways of looking at it. It's one of those things that's sometimes can be hard to pin down exactly. The definition that I gave it is you are always striving to be the best. You're always striving to be the best. That can lead you in all sorts of different ways. That can be abused just as easily as it can be well used. I was reading through Jonathan Edwards' resolutions, and one of his resolutions was this: resolved always to do that which I shall wish I had done when I see others do it. And I think that it's our old archaic English. Resolved always to do that which I shall wish I had done when I see others do it. So if I see, Hans do something well, and I'm like, man, I should be adding that to myself. I should be doing that as well. Or any one of you guys, Dave, Jim, whatever. See that somebody else, instead of being, man, they got one up on me, man, I have to pull them down to get ahead of them. It's this idea is, hey, that's something that's great. I can learn from that. Paul pointed to himself as an example and, said, do the things that I do. We have Christ as our example. So you're always striving to be the best. And do you know why when I say that, I say you are always striving to be the best instead of your best? You know because it's a big distinction. You want to kind of explain the distinction? Yeah, why don't you, if you don't mind.
When we're doing our best, we certainly have a lot of limitations. And we probably, will never measure up to what God's been for.
Yeah.
Through God's work in us, we can accomplish to be the best. What He has in mind for us.
Yeah. Very good. And that's the key distinction there. Yeah. So otherwise it limits us to what we can do in our own power, to what we can do in our own strength. And so that's why I use that language. You're always striving to be the best with God's help, with the strength which He supplies. And that means in this life we're never settling again, because we never reach perfection in this life. Paul's talking about how he was continually I lost it. But in Philippians 3rd chapter, he talks about how he's always going after it. Again, in that chapter 3, and I lost the phrasing, but so we were striving to be the best. And I had an example, one of my favorite examples of this. A friend of mine, someone I ran with for a couple of years. She was the obese girl who came to join the cross-country team because she got kicked off the field hockey team. She didn't make the cut, which at MVU is very difficult to do. You have to be fairly terrible to not be able to make a team. And so she was obese, and she kind of ran with a hitch. Like, she did not have a stride. And it just looked painful, and I'm sure it was very painful. And she would run. She started out running in the mid-30s. She might even took her like 40 minutes to run a cross-country race when she first started. And so she was in the group of people who, when they come and when they're finishing, like, everybody cheers for them. Everybody, or not cheers, at least claps for them, right? They get the pity clap. That's how far back she was. She's the one that you're kind of waiting for, just kind of like to hurry up and finish the meet, tabulate the results, so you can go home. In her first year as a freshman, she was out of 356 girls who ran at the state meet that year. That included varsity and JV. She was 337. She was in the bottom 20 in the state. All right. But she was also very determined. Now, her name, she was Megan Flint, and some of you might know the Flints here. She's from Highgate. But her dad was the cross-country coach, and her sister was the star cross-country runner. She was the natural athlete who was in the top 25 in the state her freshman year. And Megan was determined she wasn't going to do cross-country because, there's pressure on her from her dad to do cross-country. She was going to do field hockey. That's what she liked. But when she joined cross-country, she decided she was going to be good, and she decided she was going to beat her sister. She wanted to be good like her sister. And so she trained and trained and trained, ran in the summers, continued to train. Her next year, we let her go on the state meet. We let her run varsity. She was the 7th girl on varsity, which means she wasn't scoring, but we let her be in the race and be on the varsity team for that team. Her next year, she's number 2 or 3 on the team. And then finally, her senior year, she continually training, running 12 months of the year, putting everything into it. By the time she gets to her senior year, she's skinny. She has a great stride. Totally changed person. And her senior year at States, she finished 14 out of 454 girls. She made top 25, go on to represent the state at New England's, which is the 6 New England states there. And she was running D2, and so she was number 2 in Division II. And so I use that to illustrate the fact not being your best. Like we just said, Megan, just do your best. We would have been anybody would be happy with her just getting underneath 30 minutes and say she runs, high 20s. Right, 30 minutes is one of those barriers that people try to break, right? We could have just been happy and say, Megan, you're doing great, you're doing awesome. Look at how far you've come. from running in the 40s. Now you're at least in the back of the JV in the back of the pack of the JV. You're not so far out behind running by yourself with the other people who are waddling in. And we could say, Megan, you've done terrific, right? But she wasn't satisfied with that. She went and put in her all to it and got the results of being one of the top distance runners in the state, going from being one of the 20 worst distance runners to being part of the 20 best in the span of 4 years. And so that's what can happen with any one of us as we run to win. The strength of the power that God gives us. I remember reading a book that Laureate gave me, Coal Miner, A Prince with God, about Rees Howells. Some of you might be familiar with the name of Rees Howells. He started a Bible school in Wales in about the time of World War II. But he started out as a coal miner, just a guy going every day to work in the coal mines. And yet God used him during the Welsh revival. He was a preacher, a lay minister during that time. God used him mightily. And most of the time, as I'm reading the biography, he's going around and preaching and stuff the whole time, like he's just a coal miner. Most of the time when he was doing preaching during the revival, it wasn't until afterwards, years later, that he quits being a coal miner and starts a Bible school. But, just like many of us, we all work a second job. We always work a job. And here's the guy that wrote a biography on it. He was just a coal miner, put in long hours, hard hours. And yet he took the time, to spend time in the Word and in prayer to be full of the Spirit so he could speak and he could be used of God in the meetings. He didn't have that great big education. Same thing with A.W. Tozer, right? All of you here know the name of A.W. Tozer. And yet he only had a grade school education. He didn't have a high school education. He didn't go to college. And yet God used him mightily. He was the preacher in a big church in Chicago. He was the editor of the Alliance Weekly, I believe, the Alliance magazine for a while. Prolific author, and a lot of us here have been blessed by him. But just again, a simple man, a simple man. And he could go on throughout. I remember a sermon by this British guy. It just sounded better with his British accent. But he went through a list of missionaries. And one of them, was Kerry Williams, the father of modern missions. And he was told, don't go out. He was a simple cobbler, and he was about 22, 23 when he went out to India. And the elders in his church told him, no, don't go, you're too young. And this British preacher say, sit down, boy, you're too young. And yet William Carey goes out, and he's the father of modern missions. And he goes through a list of people like that who aren't the stars, as it were. They're not the Jonathan Edwards who was Yale trained, who's spent 8 to 13 hours in a study every day. Right? These are just simple guys like you and me, cobblers, a coal miner, and yet they ran to win. They ran to win. They put in their all for Christ, and and avail themselves to be used of God. They could have just been content to come in and sit and let someone else do everything. Let somebody else do the leading, do the speaking. But they allowed God to use them. And they put in the work to be used by God. There's one thing, as you read great Christian biographies, these guys put in the work to be used of God as well. It wasn't, they put in the time. There was a sacrifice involved with getting to where they got. There was a price. Evan Roberts was used of God during the Welsh revival, same revival as Rees Howells, right? But he was the main man, was Evan Roberts, and it wrecked his health. Like that time just totally destroyed him. It was he paid a price. And we may not all have to pay that same price But there is a price to be paid if we're going to run to win. It's not easy. You have to put in the time. And just while I'm in here, talking about these great men of faith who's gone before, his books you read, you can listen to some of their testimonies. And biography is a great one. It's great to be in Christian biography. Outside of the Bible, it's one of the greatest things you can read is Christian biographies, because then you get in, behind the scenes look at some of these people who've gone on before, and you see what they've put in. You don't just see them on the stage. You get to see their life, how many hours they spent in prayer, and how the Lord led them, and the difficulties that they went through, and the times when they're like, just what do I do? How is this going to work out? And you see their well-written biography, you'll see their frailty, their humanity, how they're people, as talks about of Elijah and James, they're people of like passions as we. They're people like us, like you and I. And they avail themselves to be used of God. There's very simple people to the smart ones. God has used them all. God has used them all. And in this, we got to be willing to do what no one else is willing to do. We got to be willing to do what no one else is willing to do. That is so key. Or what we think no one else is willing to do. Right? As I've talked about it before, it's easy to see people. You don't necessarily see the work that they put in behind the scenes. You don't necessarily see what goes into it. And so I know the devil's, with me is, said, well, they're living to a different standard, just because I'm in church and see them for a few hours and I don't know what they're doing the rest of their time, right? Saying, be like, no, they're not spending much time in prayer. You can get away with it. See, he's a good Christian. You can get away with that too, right? And that's not the case. Now, maybe it's true of him, that person. I don't know. It's not my worry. It's not my concern. We need to be willing to do what no one else is willing to do, because so many people are willing to take the easy road. They just take the easy road. They do what's easiest. They won't push through. They won't do the difficult things. They won't discipline themselves in the way that they have to in order to run to win. Right? It takes a greater degree of discipline. Right? It's like those people who just come to practice, show up to practice, and they go through and they run the practice. There's so much more than that, right? You're not going to be good at running or good at any sport if you just show up to practice and do what the coach tells you to do, right? It takes a lot more than that. It takes a lot more than that. In the same way, just showing up to church, showing up to the meetings at church isn't enough. It's not going to get you to where you need to go in order to run the win. This is just the pit stop. Most of the work is done in the time we're by ourselves or alone. That's where the majority of the work is going to be done. And we come together to be encouraged to go back out and fight and live. And in our homes, when we're alone, when no one else is watching, that will determine how far we'll go in the things of God. That will make the difference. And then just kind of a balance in part of this as well. It's not our job to save everyone. It's not our job to do everything. And that's kind of one of a balancing act you learn in this, right? So it can be hard. And sometimes when you have this mentality of just going all out, you can feel like you have to do everything. You feel like you have to save everyone. Like you have to be involved and do everything. There may be times when you're involved in a lot of things. There may be times when God just pulls you back, right? There's times of waiting on the Lord. And that's what you see, too, when you read great Christian biography. You see the times where that great preacher was just waiting on God. Those times when maybe he wasn't as active, right? We just think he was just, always active, always doing something. There are lots of times when we might be that way. There's also times when you just have to step back. And maybe you just have to spend more time alone with God. As God gives you a message over time, and then you go out with that message. burning in your heart. But it's not our job to save everyone. We do what God would have us to do. Like look at Paul in Acts 16, 6 through 8, right? They weren't allowed to preach the gospel in Asia. They weren't allowed to go into Bithynia and some of these other areas. The Holy Spirit kept them from going there, right? And because he had a specific mission, a specific place for Paul and his group, Luke and the rest of them who were together. They had a different place for them to go. They were to go to Macedonia and bring the gospel to that part of the world. And then you see later in one of Peter's epistles, he mentions he's writing to some of the places that Paul skipped in Acts 16. And so we think that maybe that was Peter's area where Peter might have gone, or that was somebody else's job to take care of that area, take care of those people in those areas to bring the gospel to them. And it was Paul's job and his group just to follow the Lord and do his leading. So we follow the Lord. He's the one who's in control. He's the one moving all the parts and all the pieces. So we just got to do what God has set before us, what God has given us to do, and do it well, do it hard. And while we're on this topic, go to Colossians 3. Colossians 3, 23 through 24. Talk about running to win. Talk about running to win now a little bit as a result relates to work. And if one of you guys wants to read that loudly when you get it.
And whatever you do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord receive Christ. But he who does wrong will be repaid for what he has done, and there is no partiality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The main part we'll look at is whatever you do you work heartily as for the Lord. Do you work heartily? Work at it. Hard as for the Lord, with all your heart as for the Lord. And Bonnie last week mentioned Joseph. He's a great example of someone who worked the way that every Christian should work. Right? We know the story. Sold into slavery in Egypt, and he could have gone, oh woe is me, right? He had the minimum wage job. He was, a dead end job, right? And yet he worked in such a way that everyone around him saw how good he was at what he did. And he was promoted there within the house of Potiphar. Potiphar's wife takes notice of him, right? He won't compromise. She wants him to sleep with her. He won't compromise. He ends up in prison, right? Again, he finally gets somewhere. He finally starts making headway, right? Where he was at. He's the top servant in the house, and now he's back at the bottom and he's back in prison. So again, instead of putting his head down and saying, man, I don't deserve to be here. God, why did you do this to me? Again, he works just through his attitude or whatever he was doing in there. He's noticed by the jailer, and he puts him in charge of some of the prisoners. Now he's making headway even in prison. He couldn't keep Joseph down. He couldn't keep Joseph down. He's put in charge there in the prison. He does his job so well there in the prison, right, that Pharaoh ends up hearing about him years later, right, through interpreting the dream of one of Pharaoh's servants who got put in prison for a little while. Pharaoh hears about him and brings him out, and he ends up being second in command of all Egypt. The guy who was sold as a slave ends up being number 2 in all the land of Egypt. Now, if he just put his head down and pouted that whole time, that wouldn't have happened, now would it? Right? Deliverance would have risen for people of God, for Jacob and his family from someplace else. But he was put in charge of all of Egypt because of the way he worked, and the wisdom that God gave him, the favor that God showed with him. But I believe it started with his attitude and the way he worked at work. And this is important. I've worked with people who are Christians who they put in an application at some of the places where they've worked or I've worked with them. Their application is immediately discarded. They are never going to work there again because of the way they work there. They're never going to be welcome there. What does that say about the things of God? When we work well, it lays credence to the message that we bring. Remember my senior year? I was going up for an award at the end of the indoor track season. And one of the bigwigs in indoor track was the Fairhaven coach, right? He's from the other side of the state. I never talked to the man before in my life. I didn't really race against any of his runners. He didn't have any good distance runners. They had some sprinters, but no distance runners, so I wasn't hanging around any of his team either. Never really had a conversation with anybody from his team or anything like that. Yeah, I'm going up there to receive the award. He's handing it to me, shaking his hand, and we're standing up there for a second, and he says, "So I hear you're going overseas." And I was like, "Yeah, the new mission work." And I was like, "Man, how did this guy know?" I don't know how he knew anything about that. Why does he know that? But the only, he probably doesn't know most anybody else on my team, their names, and yet he knows what I want to do after high school. It was because of the way, not only that I ran, the way I carried myself. It's part of why I was getting the award. At work is the same way, right? I don't work on Sundays. Never have. That's always been my policy. And so I told them that, and they wanted to supposed to go up to full-time management, right? Because I'd already been promoted from a crew to manager, assistant manager, right? Nothing I ever sought. They just came up to me one day. I've been working there for about 7 or 8 months, and they said, "Hey, you want to become a manager?" One of the managers is going out to have a surgery done. And there's other ones who've been there for years who are faster at their job than me and different things, but they asked me to become the manager. So I said yes. So over time, I eventually was going to go up to full-time management. The only problem with full-time management is you have to be available 7 days a week. All right, you can't say you don't work Sundays. And I said, I don't work Sundays. And so it keeps on going on for a little while. The managers in the store are like, we want him as a full-time manager. All right, we'll take 6 of his days. He can have the 6 days availability. We want him those days. We want him that extra day of work, so it would be 50 hours instead of 40 hours. And so they had my back. And eventually, the boss comes around, who can obviously pull the strings and make exceptions, comes around to it because both of the bigwig managers in our store are for it. So I ended up with full-time management, and it happens right before I get married, right? So God had his hand all over that. Right when I needed the raise, I get it, and I don't work Sundays. And I'm the exception in the company out of our 6 stores. And then I'm even able to ask for more money, and they give it to me as well. But the only reason why that happens again is because of the way I worked, how hard I worked, and developing myself and trying to be the best manager in the company, which I wasn't, but I was one of the better ones. I was working on it. But can you imagine if I'd been a lazy guy? Say even I get to a manager and I'm still kind of lazy, not working well, and I say, I'm a Christian, I want Sundays off. It's like, you're kind of lazy. What does that do to the reputation? What does that do to the name of Christ? Doesn't our hard work embellish it, make it look palatable to others? Make it look, wow, I want what that person has, right? It wasn't because I wasn't perfect there, did things that I was ashamed of, had to apologize to people at times. But what is the overall tenure? And then, so I was getting my Sundays off, and other people who, other people were losing their jobs. Other Christians losing their jobs and never to come back. And so we don't want to be like that. We got to hold ourselves to a higher standard. To do our work and do it well as unto the Lord. Bill and Bonnie are great examples of this as well. Working hard. Some of the stories that Bill has told me about some of the things they do. He goes now into some of these clinics and helps out. And sometimes some of the clinics he's gone into to help out, he kind of sits there kind of frustrated. They're not running things efficiently. They're not doing this or that. And it's hard. And yet, because of the way that Bill and Bonnie worked, they worked hard, they worked smart, the way they ran their business. It's a testimony to Christ. And because of it now, you see them being able to go over to Spain and stuff like that. And they always took care of our family, our family's dentist needs. We never had dentist insurance when we were here. And I don't know how many thousands of dollars were just put into our family's teeth and then to the other missionaries that came through this church and other churches in New Hampshire and stuff like that. I'm probably kind of embarrassed now, but that's an example and how what it does to the name of Christ. Tozer said we shouldn't just be good people, we ought to be the best people. So we have the Holy Spirit within us. We need to do our work well. The reason I dwell on this is I've seen it not done that way. I've seen it not done that way. And it's just doing, lots of times it's just doing the little things well, right? Being faithful in the little things. Being faithful in the little things that we're given to do at work. Being on time. Finishing your work well, getting it done fully. Not cutting corners, whatever it is that we do. Sometimes it's just the little things. It's not necessarily the big things that we do. I know it's frustrating when somebody thinks it's no big deal to show up 5 minutes late. Well, you're wondering, man, that person's 5 minutes late. Are they going to be here at all? Do I need to call somebody else to cover the shift? Man, we're busy right now. We could use them. We're falling behind. And you don't know because you have enough people who don't show up. And you may think it's not a big deal. It's a big deal to the person who has to deal with the fallout. And it's not enough just to work hard, right? We all get that, I think. It's not enough just to work hard. Because you can work hard, but that's not enough. You got to work smart as well, and do your job well. Do your job better, improve it. Yeah, Bill.
I was thinking about, people watch you, or they watch us, and they want to see something different about us. And I was just thinking, I described some place that Bill Marriott, I had a Marriott hotel deal. He was walking through some place, and there was a knife in the trash, and he stopped and picked it out, the trash, and where it's supposed to be. And they said, why'd you do that? He said, because people, look to see the little things important. It's important for me to do that. This guy was $1 zillion. He's pulling out a knife, $5 knife out of the trash, and because that's what you should do. So,
Yep. Just doing the little things and working smart as well as working hard. We had a friend who was an incredibly hard worker, right? Nobody could fault him. He's always one of the hardest workers. If you wanted to look at some of the hardest workers, again, on the track team, you'd look to Harrison Gates, right? He's one of the hardest workers. And yet he never really developed because he wouldn't listen. He had some problems with the stride. We told him to loosen up. He's always really tense and tight. He always works really, really hard. Never really got anywhere because he wasn't able as well to work smart about it. And now in today's world, you got to also work smart, not just hard. Got to be looking to improve your job, maybe expand your job as well. So we do these things to become better, to adorn the name of Christ, so that, right, like it says in Peter, talks about how, so that when people look at us, they'll have nothing evil to say of us. They have to accuse us of something at work. They'll have nothing evil to accuse us of. Wherever we're at, we run in such a way that we can win. Whether our job is big and glamorous or whether we hate our job or whatever else. Right? We work hard as unto the Lord. Dad talks about cleaning toilets as unto the Lord when he was at Wyeth for a couple of years. I can't imagine that was very pleasant. coming back from the mission field, God having called you here, presumably to minister, and being stuck in Wyeth cleaning toilets, and then eventually in the office working for 2 years before he came as pastor here. But he did it well, and even there he went from cleaning the toilets to another job within the company because of the way he worked. He wasn't the guy who worked just when the boss came around. He was always working, doing his job well, getting more done than the person who was before him. All these different things. So we run in such a way that we may win. We strive to be the best through the strength and the power that God gives us. We don't stop. We don't let up. We keep on going, and it's hard. It's not easy. But we keep going at it. And running to win is a habit. It's a habit. All right? It's not. I always thought that this type of mentality, was fairly easy. I just kind of wondered why everyone else wasn't the same way. I've had this mentality for most of my life, right? And then I finally stopped running, right? And eventually I tried to get back into it. And I was going out running, and I walked when I'm running. I walked when I was out on a run, out on Monument Road, walking. It's like, you never walk when you run. You always jog slowly. And yet, I was walking, I just didn't want to run, didn't have the energy, didn't have anything. I was like, man, so this is what it feels like to have that. You always call it the people who walk instead of running. It's like, man, this stinks, right? And so then I discovered that there's a habit that's developed. I've told the story before of thinking of teaching passionately and seeing an older person kind of smile at it, right, and thinking that he was just thinking that I needed to mellow out, right? That was the idea I got stuck in my head. And so I was thinking, well, maybe I'll mellow out as I get older. And so I tried that at points too. And I find that is obviously a terrible way to live. If any of you have tried it before, if you haven't, great. But it's terrible, right? To cut back and not be going all out, not be running hard. You think running hard is hard. It's worse the other way around. And then trying to get back into it that with the same intensity, it took time. I had to develop the habits again over time to get back to where I needed to be, to get back to that same intensity, that same level of running to win in my personal life. And so it's really a habit. It's something that's developed over time. And if you don't have it, you can develop it. It won't be easy. It'll take time. If you've never done it before, it'll probably take you more time to get there. But you can do it. Take the time. Struggle through it to get to that place where you're running to win. It's like running. It's never fun to get in shape, right? That's never very pleasant, but it's awesome when you can go and run the race and set a PR. That's a lot of fun. Or when you can go out and just knock out miles on end and just glide, right? That's a lot of fun. It's the same way in life. Sometimes you can struggle through things to get to a place where it's easier to live with that intensity. At first, we might, get tired and say, man, I can't do it. I can't do it. But as we develop it over time, as we see the benefits of it, the results, it becomes a habit, it becomes a way of life. And it just becomes what we do, running to win. So Paul could get to the end of his life and said, I've run the race, I fought the good fight. Say, yes, I did it. I made it through to the end. Let that be said of us. Let that be said of us as well. That we've made it through. We've run through. So we can look back at the end of our life, on our deathbed and say, yes, I've done it. I have no regrets. You'll never, ever regret running all out for Christ. You'll never, ever regret that. You'll never regret having spent time in prayer and the Word or anything like that. You'll regret not having done it, right? If you can look back and say that the standard of Christianity that you lived is not the standard of Christianity that you know to be the highest. That's why I'm glad I was brought up on listening to Leonard Ravenhill and Duncan Campbell and stories of revival. Listening to these things, I'm glad I was brought up, doing book reports on missionaries and seeing them, because I had such a high standard. You look in the scriptures and you see such a high standard, and then you see it in the lives of other people since that time. See such a high standard. So it really ruined me for anything else. I tried to convince myself at times that it's okay to go down to some lower level, but it doesn't work for very long. And it's miserable. So whatever that highest standard of Christianity is that you've seen, that you know that God has revealed to you, that God has shown to you, that is the standard at which you live. Don't go to some other lower standard. Some people say that, when it talks about being a disciple, that's something different than what it means to just be a normal Christian, right? I've heard that before. That's trash. That's garbage. It's not. It's called to forsake all for Christ. Love Christ above everything else. It's trash. There's some Christians who are just super Christians, right? That's trash. That's a lie. The devil would love us to think that we're somehow down here, and other people, it's okay if they live up here. It's not okay. It's not okay. God calls us to run all out. God calls us to run all out. I hope you get that from these few lessons. I hope God stirs within your own hearts, as He does within mine, to continue to push hard, to go all out, to not be like the majority of people, to be like the few, who go on with God, to be like Joshua, who wasn't with the camp of Israel when they were making the golden calf, but who was waiting for Moses at the foot of the mountain. Be like Joshua, who, when Moses was done in the tent of meeting, Joshua stayed behind. Is it any surprise that he was the leader of Israel? Moses, everybody was outside of the camp, and there's a couple guys left inside the camp of Israel, and they were prophesying. And Joshua comes up to Moses and says, Moses, you want me to put a stop to these two guys who are over here prophesying? And what does Moses say? No, I wish that everybody would be the same as that, right? Wish everyone would prophesy like that. Wish that everyone would be in that same place. Because you see over and over again Moses getting frustrated as he leads. It's because of the majority. Again, the majority were so intent on holding back. 12 spies went to Canaan, right? 10 were good, or 10 were bad and 2 were good, right? 2 out of the 10, and yet they held their ground. They held their ground. It was worth it for them in the end. They were the only 2 from their generation to make it into the promised land, and to boot, they were giving land within the promised land. They were given choice land within the promised land to boot. So don't be like the majority. If you ever find yourself thinking like, I'm like everyone else around me, wake up. Something's wrong. You say, well, John, this is a great church. Shouldn't the majority be like that? The majority are not going to be like that. Don't settle. When you find yourself being like everyone else, wake up. Strive harder. Push harder. And maybe somebody else will see you pushing harder and say, man, I better wake up and push harder. So we talked about this not being the same. This is not running with the pack. That's not how you win. That's why I talk about running to win is a different mentality. Now there's some differences, obviously, between a race in between the Christian life, there's also a lot of parallels. And one of those parallels is you do not run with the pack. You do not run with the pack. You don't get trapped with everyone else. You push hard. You push hard. You see someone else pushing, you push harder. One of the greatest sounds I ever heard, I still remember it to this day, was I heard this. 200 meters left. 200 meters left. A guy who'd taken the lead. I took the lead back with 300 meters left. But we were going neck and neck. Or no, I hadn't taken the lead yet. He was still in the lead, right? I usually had the lead at that point. But he had the lead. Last race of the season. And I was dead. I was tired. Get the 200 meters. And I just floor it, right? I floor it. And all I hear is, I hear him. I knew it right then. I had him gassed. That's the running to win mentality. Now, not that we're trying to, that's the running to win mentality. You're just going out so hard. You're not content to run neck and neck with someone else. It's not the same idea of trying to outdo one and say, hey, I'm better than you. What's this idea that we get here from Jonathan Edwards? Always do that which I shall wish I had done when I see others to do it. And never being content, because it's so easy. It's so easy to say that this is a great church, this is a good church. I can just be like everyone else around me. We're not going to get to where we want to go. We're not going to get to where we want to go if we do that. Push harder. Push harder. Push harder. Because I don't see revival yet. So there's more we can do. We can push harder. If you read the old stories and see what God has done, you know there's a lot more that God could be doing in our midst. I know there's a lot more that God can be doing in my life. If I'll but take the time that a Finney took, or that a Leonard Ravenhill took, to be with God, to push hard. To push hard. They're no different than me. They're no different. They're no different than you. So don't be content to run with the pack. You're running to win. You're running to win. And even in Israel came to the Red Sea. They saw everything that God had done. And only 2 say, let's go in. Only 2 say, let's go in. And the rest say, let's hold back. Let's close with prayer. Lord, we thank you for this time. Thank you for what you're doing. Help us to run to win, Lord. Stir within us, God. Set us on fire for you, Lord. May we not be lukewarm. May we not be content, Lord. Oh, Lord, as Leonard Ravenhill said, Lord, put a holy dissatisfaction within us tonight. Put a holy dissatisfaction with us, Lord, within us this morning, Lord. Stir within us, Lord. May we run to win. May we run all out for you, Lord, for you are worthy. You are worthy, Lord. There's nothing else that we want to do, Lord. We praise your name, God. There is no one like you. In Jesus' precious and holy name, amen.